Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start finishing up Unit 1, Lesson 3. Remember, this lesson is titled, What Historical Developments Influence Modern Ideas of Individual Rights? So we finished off here talking about the idea of capitalism. If you've taken economics class, or if you have a general idea of what economics is, you probably understand a little bit about what capitalism is, or free enterprise economic system is. So we're going to relate how a capitalist or free enterprise society relates to a government. How does a government deal with free enterprise in capitalism? So capitalism is an economic system in which the means of producing, a little typo there, the means of producing and distributing goods are privately owned and operated for profit in competitive markets. So unlike feudalism, where everyone's working for the good of the Lord to make things and produce things so the Lord can benefit from them, in capitalism, we're going to switch the theory and say everybody should try and make the best possible product and then compete with each other. So not only does that make it better for the producer, it also makes it best for the consumer, because now we're getting the best products out of these things. And this guy in the top right here, that's Adam Smith. He comes up with this idea. He's a Scottish economist, and he really popularizes the idea of capitalism and promotes self-interest in a free market. He argues that this leads to overall economic well-being. He also argues that the American colonies were too expensive for the British to retain, so they should just give them up. So, he's a little radical as far as the British crown is concerned. I mean, those Scottish people are usually considered kind of radical to the British, but ever see Braveheart, the Scottish people are a little crazy, but that's neither here nor there. Capitalism is Adam Smith's main argument for why the colonies should be let go. So this new system encourages people to pick their occupation and start and sell their own businesses, buy property. It encourages people to do these things. It encourages the ideas of social mobility that we talked about in Lesson 2. So this is radical. This is different. It's not feudalism where a lord owns the land and he's granted that land by the king to watch over it, and you work on it and you give everything back to the Lord. That's totally different. Adam Smith argues that that's a terrible way to try and promote the common good of society. He argues capitalism, looking out for your own self-interest, also ends up benefiting everybody as the common good. Because if I'm working harder to make more money and I'm producing more goods and services, simple ideas of supply and demand show if you have more of a supply of something, the price is more likely to go down. And if you have multiple people competing, selling different products, then people are going to go with whoever makes the better product at the better price. So competition drives not just lower prices, but it also drives higher quality products, okay? So all of these ideas encourage people to kind of take new steps. So the power of Europe begins to shift from the inherent property owners to these wealthy commercial classes, that people start selling large amounts of products and end up gaining a great deal of wealth from that. So instead of this traditional, based off of nobility and your last name, now it's based more off of wealth. Natural rights philosophy and Protestant religion contributed to the rise of capitalism. Now, why did that happen? Okay, I want you guys to think about that for a second on your own here, and think, how did natural rights philosophy and the Protestant religion contribute to the rise of capitalism? It has to do with the rights of the individual. So the Protestant religion, remember, talks about your individual relationship with God, promoting your individual relationship with God, and instead of kind of these common civic virtue ideas, talking more about obeying God's laws and having an individual aspect to it. Same thing with natural rights philosophy. Promoting your own life, liberty, and property, protecting your own rights, and the government should be there to protect those rights for you. And capitalism is all about self-promotion and self-interest as well. The harder you work, the more you will benefit in a capitalist system, okay? All right. So, what was the new economic system of capitalism? All right, what do you think? With the development of capitalism, people began to view the individual differently than they had in classical republics or during the Middle Ages. What was the different view, and why did it come about? How were the rise of the nation-state and capitalism related to individualism? What effect did these developments have on the common good? So these are questions that I want you guys to think about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. It's totally an opinionated question. So think about those, upcoming on the test and things like that. Think about the what do you think sections. All right, so on to the next slide. How did the Enlightenment inspire the American founders, okay? Well, first of all, science and technology increased rapidly. We call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages as well because there's very little scientific or technological increases. However, during this time, we see this rapid expansion. Because of this, people begin to believe that they could solve problems like treating diseases or understand the world around them. Okay, we can look at all these different people historically and figure out, okay, why did they believe some of these ideas and principles? So first of all, we have this guy Francis Bacon up here at the top left. Okay, every time I say his name, I think of crispy bacon, so it makes me hungry. But anyways, Francis Bacon was the first scientist during the Enlightenment to try and understand the nature for the betterment of humanity. All right, so a lot of these people follow in his footsteps after, but Francis Bacon is the first scientist that looks at the surroundings around him and tries to figure out, okay, how can we look at these things and try and make life better for individuals, okay? And then you have Hobbes and Locke coming up after Bacon. They follow in his footsteps in large part, and they took this idea from Bacon and they applied it to human nature and the natural state of human beings, arguing that people could be understood, predicted, and controlled if you understand how society works. So now we can argue that Hobbes and Locke are not only some of our first political scientists, they are philosophers, they're also kind of sociologists looking at how can society work. And in a large part, political science and sociology go hand in hand. How do people interact in society, and what's the best way to understand people and try and predict outcomes of how people are going to behave? You also have this guy at the bottom, Montesquieu. Montesquieu is extraordinarily influential as well. We've talked about him a little bit already. But he argues that the best form of government had to be tailor-made to each society. Every place is different, is what he argues. You can't take representative democracy and take it anywhere in the world and expect it to work. It has to be based on the social, economic, and geographic conditions of each society. So, for example, a dictatorship probably wouldn't work very well in the United States. However, in a very small community, maybe having one strongman, like in a feudal system, could be fairly efficient. Everybody would know the direction of society. Everybody would know what their goals were. Everybody would know who they needed to look to for judge rulings and things like that. It might be fairly efficient. And he would also argue that, in modern times, America trying to force democratic republics on foreign societies, like in Afghanistan and Iraq, where you have multiple different ethnic groups, different religious beliefs, and you're trying to mash all these people together under one nation. Just because it worked here in America doesn't mean it's going to work anywhere in the world. So Montesquieu argues you have to take a lot of different factors into consideration when forming a government. All right, so how did the Enlightenment inspire our American founders? Okay, so I have James Madison over here on the right. He's really the one that takes a lot of these philosophers, and he's an avid reader. One thing that all of our founding fathers really have in common is reading things from Locke, Hobbes, Montesquieu, Bacon, even going as far back as Aristotle or Francis Bacon, Descartes, Isaac Newton. All these people, they're reading from all these famous scientists during the Enlightenment. See, American founders used the writings of these political, economic, and religious thinkers to understand the workings of government and social institutions. James Madison studied them by far the most, and when they meet for the Constitutional Convention, he's the only one that shows up with a plan, with a Virginia plan, and he says this is how our government should work. And he writes it based off of thousands upon thousands of pages from these political philosophers that he's read and he believes is the best way to institute a government. James Madison is also famous for saying that these studies, the studying of different political philosophers and instituting new governments, is what he called the new science of politics. And James Madison really was the one that creates the field of political science. So you have to thank James Madison for being enrolled in Political Science 101. All right, and that is it for Unit 1, Lesson 3.